Today I'm going to have sharing you on the mindfulness of breathing. As all of you know, this is a major meditation practice that we do here. Basically we do two, we emphasize two. One is mindfulness of breathing and the other one is metta bhavana. And we of course combine it with mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of the recollection of the Buddha also. So this is a very important, very important meditation. So today, one major reason for me to share with you on this is to correct some misunderstanding on mindfulness of breathing and to bring out the importance of this meditation as emphasized by the Buddha himself. You will see that very soon. Now, usually the mindfulness of breathing is understood nowadays in some modern movements, in quite a number of modern movements who prefer to emphasize vipassana practice. Of course, I notice among these, I think some are praiseworthy also, and their vipassana practice is also basically centered around mindfulness of breathing, and or on the basis of mindfulness of breathing. I think this is a correct approach. But in many other cases, there is this one-sided emphasis that mindfulness of breathing belongs to the domain of just samatha and not vipassana. And samatha is always inferior to vipassana. I have emphasized many times in many contexts that according to my understanding of the Buddha's own teaching in the suttas and the teachings of the great disciples in the Pali Suttas and the Chinese Agamas, in fact, these two are not separable, samatha and vipassana. And it is said that one whose mind is samahita, is equipoised. I like to use that rendering, often translated as concentrated, is equipoised, unified, sees things truly as they are. So when you achieve equipoise of your mind, which includes concentration, which includes samatha, you necessarily have insight. You have the ability to see into reality truly as it is. So the two are not separated, and this is definitely a teaching in the early discourses. Of course, in the later traditions, especially in the Theravada, there came to be a very clear separation of samatha and vipassana. And in this scheme, mindfulness of breathing is relegated to the domain of samatha. That is to say, it is meant for concentration. Especially if the word samatha, the word samadhi is interpreted as just concentration. And I think that gives a wrong impression. Actually, if you look more carefully into the commentary traditions, and including the Buddha-Ghosa's tradition, you find that even they don't emphasize like this. And regarding mindfulness of breathing, they understand it to also cover both samatha and vipassana. Even though at the same time, there seems to be the emphasis that mindfulness of breathing is a method to counteract your distraction. But that applies to other methods of so-called samatha practices, even like metta bhavana, even like asubha. And I have said that each of them, when properly pursued and properly cultivated, actually is a whole path. It's a complete path to liberation. So that is to say that, for instance, mindful breathing is not just for counteraction of distractive mental state, and the meditation on the impure, the asubha bhavana, is not just to counteract sensual craving, and so on. And mindfulness of practice of radiation of metta bhavana, of metta, I have also emphasized many times and explained in details that it is a path of actually achieving insight of no self, insight of even emptiness, if you like, through developing our emotions in a spiritual way. It's a perfection of if you like, panya, through the perfection of karuna. So it is in this way that we should understand anapanasati. In brief, it is not just a samatha method to help you build up your concentration. Now this is one important point I want to emphasize. And we're going to see that the Buddha himself actually, he says that he chiefly practiced this particular method before his enlightenment. So that is inspiring for us. So I hope you realize then the importance of the practice of mindfulness of breathing as taught by the Buddha. I have some, I've gathered some notes here, but in a hurry. Again, this is not comprehensive, but I think they suffice to cover the main points I have just mentioned. Okay. Firstly, I want to mention that I have a long article on the practice of mindfulness of breathing in the 16 stages, 16 mood, and that's this description of mindfulness in terms of 16 modes is a very important discourse, and you can find in the Pali Suttas. You can find also in the Chinese sources. In that article, I have collected data, material on this from different traditions. The Theravada tradition in the Sutta, in the commentary, and Sarvastivada traditions, and the Yogacara traditions, and traditions of other texts that we can find preserved in Chinese, like the Sariputra Abhidharma. So I think it's a fairly comprehensive presentation of this teaching on the 16 mode of mindfulness breathing, which is a teaching by the Buddha himself, elaborated within the various Buddhist traditions. So if you're interested, it was published several years ago in our journal, and you can find a copy. Today I have just, we are not going to have time to go through all this in details. I'd like you to read it if you are interested. So what I've done is just I have copy-paste the subtitles that I made to describe the 16 stages, and you can say that it's the copy and paste work is not very nicely done because it was done in a hurry, and I didn't have time to convert the file back into word format yet. I did it in the word format and then put into the InDesign, and then finally save it as a PDF. So I didn't have time to do all this, and also I'm a little bit of a computer illiterate now after all these years. So I didn't bother to make it artistically pleasing. So, but these are the 16 stages, very briefly. So you have In stage 1 and stage 2, you breathe in and out mindfully, and you are aware there is long breathing or short breathing. All these I have taught you, and not only taught you, not just conceptually, I have practiced with you. I have guided you in meditation on Sundays. Right? You know very well. These are only the first 2 stages. Then the discussion goes on to talk about experiencing the whole body. And this shows clearly that the mindfulness of breathing practice involves a lot more than just making your mind concentrated through breathing. In this, there is a lot of contemplation, very important psychological, spiritual contemplation. Many things are happening if you do the practice properly. So it is in this same meditation, this breathing, and the worst thing is to understand is a breathing exercise, much more than that. Okay, you can see that. The meditation on the mindfulness of breathing involves a stage of experiencing your whole body. So, and then it's clearer, for instance, when you go on to some other aspect like number 4, and you experience a calming down of all your bodily activities. Your physical, your vocal, and your mental activities are being calmed down. So it's a very profound experience you go through. First breathing in and out, and then you, in that very context, you experience the whole body, and then you feel the calming down of your bodily activities. This is in stage 4. And more, the next stage 5, you experience joy when you are breathing in and out. So your emotions, your awareness are involved in this mindful breathing practice. You see, it's much more than just concentration. And basically, it's a meditation that gives you joy. You must learn to look forward to it. If you practice this. Every day you must look forward to it, to do at least once. And that way, you can truly understand what the Buddha says, what the Buddha explains as a method of increasing psychological and spiritual joy and happiness. It's a path of happiness. In somewhat later descriptions in the Buddhist tradition, we see, particularly, for instance, the Sarastivada tradition, but not confined to that tradition, of course. They speak of part of spiritual practice that can be either a difficult one or one of ease and comfort. And this is mindful breathing is a path of ease and comfort. It's a path of comfort. So remember that. It's up to you to choose. If you want a path of difficulty, you can also choose. But you have the mindful breathing. There's a path of comfort. So you can see that among these 6 stages, for instance, 5 and 6, you enter the stages of experiencing joy. And you must build up awareness, mindfulness of it. You're not just experiencing it in the sense of passively letting this emotion come up, but you become aware of it. And then the in stage 6, experiencing happiness. 7, experiencing the mental activities. And then 8, calming down the mental activities. Just now the bodily and now the mental. And then you come to, so from the bodily experiences, bodily experiencing, now you come more and more into your inner dimension of your mind, the mental activities, and you feel calm there. You experience your thought, and you gladden your thought. Again, you can see the emphasis that it is a process that makes you feel happier and happier. You gladden your thought, and then finally, from stage 11 to stage 16, you see the important emphasis that you proceed to what a later tradition calls the, in a narrower sense, the vipassana practice. So contemplating impermanence, abandonment, detachment, cessation. So it leads you finally to liberation of mind, starting from your practice of mindfulness of your breathing in and out. So when you think like this, you know, the whole process consists of 16 stages, 16 modes, in which you see the aspect of concentration or unifications of your mind, your mental energies, and you see the experiencing of your body and thought. You see the experiencing of calm and happiness, and you see the development of insight through this very practice into impermanence and detachment, cessation. So it's in your very experiencing of unification. You're not disintegrated. You're not fragmented as a person, and you find happiness. You find serenity, and in the context of that, you develop insight. And that the whole thing is actually basically the structure of spiritual progress according to the Buddhist path. So this whole structure should be seen, should be understood in the practice of mindfulness of breathing. So although it's a very brief description, by highlighting these different stages, you can see that, as I mentioned at the beginning, mindfulness breathing is much more than a matter of doing a breathing exercise, matter of concentrating your mind. It leads you finally into happier and happier states and into the nature of reality, insight into the nature of reality. So it includes both samatha and vipassana. These are the features I have tried to incorporate in my practical guidance to you. On Sunday when we do mindfulness breathing, if you look back and see how I guide you, you'll realize that I want you to experience all these aspects subsumed under the 16 modes that I have just briefly outlined to you. So it's a most valuable spiritual practice, most valuable meditative practice. And we should begin to appreciate it more and more, to realize its importance, and to actually practice it. Now, before I go on to show what the Buddha says about this, and of course what I've described to you also, the 16 stages are found in this important discourse on the Anapanasati discourse in the Samyutta and other places. You can see that. Let me just very quickly go through a couple of points in the conclusions that I made in my article. Again, there's no time to go through all these things, and all the details are a little bit technical, but we want to emphasize certain particular aspects of this conclusion. So I have highlighted two. One is that you can see that when you look at in my article, read through it and you look at these various textual descriptions, you will see that the various texts correlate samatha and vipassana with the 16 moods. Of course, they do it somewhat differently, but certainly they realize and they want to highlight the fact that mindful breathing practice, right, include both samatha and vipassana. The way they differ is also indicated here, and we don't need to go into detail because you have to look at the description for these short sentences to make sense. So important thing is, the first point is this, that we see the different textual traditions. It's not just a Theravada, it's not just Rastivada, and also it includes other textual traditions as well as the Yogacara tradition, early Yogacara traditions. In their presentation, in the description of mindfulness of breathing practice. For one who is the intellectually restless type, distracted type, or one who too easily falls prey to conceptual entanglement, Anapanasati is the most appropriate, is the appropriate antidote. In other words, it is an antidote. But going through the description of the 16 stages, it becomes very clear that the explanation of this meditation in all traditions confirm that at its highest level, in other words, there are different levels of mindful breathing. If you restrict it to be just a mere, just a method of breathing exercise, and this is pitiable, and you don't gain the spiritual benefits, you don't get the psychological benefits of it. Yeah? In all these descriptions by the different textual traditions, we see the confirmation that at the highest level, it is a complete path of liberation. How complete? Capable of leading finally to emancipation, to arhathood. So we have to remember this. I have said it many times, very briefly, but today I want to give you some textual support. And if you read the article or if you go to, there are various English translations on the 16 mood, 16 stage mindful breathing practice in the suttas, and you will be able to appreciate it more deeply. Now, actually, as I said, the Buddha himself has told the bhikkhus after his enlightenment, that he said that when I was Bodhisattva, when I was still practicing to gain enlightenment, actually I mostly practiced this. So here is another textual support to show the importance as spoken by the Buddha himself. In a discourse called the simile of the lamb, the Buddha explains about anapanasati samadhi. Again, samadhi I translate as equipoise. You find that the English translations available, I think almost all use concentration. When developed, these are the words from the Pali Sutta translated. Bhikkhu, bhikkhus, oh bhikkhus, equipoise my mindfulness of breathing. That is anapanasati samadhi, when developed and cultivated, is of great fruit and benefit. Is of great fruit and benefit. So you can see firstly, immediately that the Buddha stresses its importance. Yeah. Then he says, I too, because this is again from the this is from the PDF text taken from Bhikkhu Bodhi's text. I too, before my enlightenment, I have changed a few words like equipoise and so on. Other than that, this is taken from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. Then he says, I too, the Buddha says, I too, Bhikkhu, before my enlightenment, when I was still a Bodhisattva. So this is not my word, this is the word in the sutta. Not yet fully enlightened. When I was not yet fully enlightened, generally dwelt in this dwelling. Generally bahulang, mostly. Imina viharena, so viharami. I dwell mostly in this state. So that dwelling I told you in the in our classes, this vihara, you see, suggests a spiritual state, a meditative state. So he's in that. When he enters into a meditative state, he relies on the method of mindful breathing. This is the Buddha himself doing it before his enlightenment to us. Then he says, while I generally dwell in this dwelling, this vihara, this is the word, neither my body nor my eyes become fatigued. Don't read this sutta too roughly and too quickly, and think, what can I get from this? Neither my body nor my eyes become fatigued, and my mind, by not clinging, was liberated from taints. First, let me explain a little bit from the Pali. I have added that in this passage. The Pali is Anupadaya cha me asavehi chittang vimucci. Vimucci is a past tense. My mind was liberated from outflow, from defilements, without clinging. We saw this word anupadaya, and in the form of anupada. And I've told you that anupada in this context is a shortened form of anupadaya. It's a gerund and used adverbially. So, in other words, it is through this method the Buddha practiced as a Bodhisattva that he gained these benefits, these great fruits. What are they? Let's summarize it. First, physical, the body. These days, people talk about vipassana, mindfulness, and they do experiments of mindful breathing, mainly or exclusively sometimes, to emphasize the so-called physiological benefits. Yeah? And I have criticized this. Of course, it does give you physiological benefit. When I do my meditation, mindful breathing every day in the morning, I feel very refreshed. When I got up and I slept late and so on, you see, and at the night I concentrated on my reflections of the text and my writing and preparing lectures, and mentally fully exhausted. And so I didn't have a chance to sleep for many hours. Of course, in the afternoon, that's why I have to make it up. I have a nap. But when I get up, I feel very tired. But after doing the meditation, I really feel refreshed. I feel light. So this is one aspect, the bodily aspect. This is a physiological aspect. So certainly, nobody would deny that. But it would be a pity, it would be a distortion to present the practice of vipassana mindfulness, as a technique for physiological benefit. I think it's overdone. It should be emphasized, but it should not be overemphasized. But in the proper, should be done in the proper proportion. And I want that, this day I see at least some movement, and they are quite, they are quite successful movement and popular movement. And some started from the West, America and so on, you see. And they want to secularize the practice of mindfulness. So that, in a way, I can understand the point. In a way, it's out of good intention. They want to make a Buddhist practice available to those who don't feel like committing themselves to any particular religious path, any religion. Well, that's fine. But when it is, the emphasis goes out of proportion, it is not only distorting, it is psychologically, psychically, physically speaking, damaging. The reason for this statement I have explained elsewhere, I'm not going to repeat here. But anyway, coming back to this point, the body, certainly the physiological benefit is there. But look, the Buddha doesn't just emphasize that. He says when he's tired, when his mind is tired and when his body is tired, he practices mindful breathing. Yeah. Then next is his mind. So this is psychological also. I have said that, well, the basic reason I said I'm not going to have time to explain what I mean when I said that when you overemphasize vipassana or mindfulness practice as a technique, in a very mechanistical sense, technique, and as if using that method as a kind of aspirin, as a Panadol, you see, this can be disastrous. Okay, very briefly speaking, at least one point I can make here is that when you do this, when you practice like this, if you are successful, if you are serious, if you are not, of course, you scratch at the surface, you don't get very much, and in a way that is better than falling into a big disaster, for instance. But mindful breathing, as taught by the Buddha in the Buddhist tradition, is meant for a much, much more profound, important purpose than this. But it certainly includes this physiological aspect. When you practice this successfully, sincerely, you develop your ability, your awareness into your own consciousness more and more. You become more and more capable of assessing the unconscious content of your own mind. And when this happens, it always happens in different degrees, if you do it continuously, without guidance, without consulting a teacher, without thinking in the whole context, what I call a totalistic context of the path of the Dhamma. If you think of it just as one isolated, extricated mechanical method, then you're bound to fall into trouble. It's as if you open up your whole mind, you open up all your subconscious, and all different contents come up to you and you can experience them, which includes many, for instance, negative contents of suppressed anger, suppressed craving and delusions. You don't know how to handle them. You don't know how to relate, how to correlate to your whole living, because you don't have, if you don't have a frame of orientation. That's why the frame of orientation is very important, and I quite like Eric Fromm's conception of Buddhism, of religion, as a frame of reference with the object of devotion. So if you don't have this, when you develop your insight, you see, it's like you are getting into the other end, the other side of the sword. You see, you get hurt, you get injured, and it's okay to get hurt if you can cure your injury and proceed further. You know the story of Angulimala. I have shown you that illustrate this point. He was of a good moral nature, intelligent, sensitive, spiritually sensitive, and sincere, and grateful to the teacher, and so on. But he was morally injured when his colleagues told lies to his teacher, saying that he had some affair with the teacher's wife and so on, and he was then sent by teacher to collect 1,000 fingers and so on as a kind of a farewell gift to the teacher after he completes his whole course of training. That is the ancient Indian tradition, and he out of obedience, out of respect, gratitude to the teacher, he changed himself. He turned into a murderer. So he experienced what we call moral injury. But the story continues that he recovered. How did he recover? He recovered because of the Dhamma, because of the Buddha. These are part and parcel of the important context, totalistic context. He has a Kalan Mitra. The Kalan Mitra par excellence, i.e. the Buddha. He has a Dhamma from the Buddha, and he recovered. And eventually, to cut the story short, he became a saint. He dropped his butcher knives. He took refuges in the Buddha. He was inspired by the Buddha. He felt happy to want to be a monk, and he truly practiced the way of the life of the monk. And finally, he was fully recovered from what we call the moral injury and became enlightened. But when negative things happen, and as I said, they are bound to happen if you are serious in your meditation. Either you are not serious, you play around with it and do half an hour, 10 minutes breathing, and no more. I don't want spiritual commitment. I don't want to change my life. I don't want so-called this thing called framework orientation are just nonsense, not for me. That kind of person. I want only physiological benefits. If you want money, I can pay you. You teach me that method. I want only the method. And unfortunately, these people are encouraged by this some modern movement. I don't say all. Who tell you that if you get the right method, everything will follow. I told you that when I was young, I was into TM, Transcendental Meditation. And that's what I was told. That's what we were told. The technique was the most important. Don't worry about your lifestyle. You don't have to do anything to change. But that's ridiculous. And of course, to cut the story short, eventually I dropped out of it. That was in my undergraduate years. So so this is either you do it very casually and lightheartedly, or really into it and so on. Of course, you may get some benefit in physiological terms, but when you become serious, you want to continue to do it and want to develop yourself, develop your consciousness, develop your human potential. If you don't do that within a proper context, a totality context, which, as I say, essentially means, for instance, you must have a frame of reference and an object devotion, using Eric Fromm's terms. You must have, for instance, for the Buddhists, you must have the Dhamma. The whole Dhamma tells you where you are, what's happening to you, what you can do, you see, and what are the dangers, what are the advantages. And then there are other things that you practice, like your compassionate attitude, your lessening of your ego, your attachment. All these are important practices. And your devotion to your teacher, devotion to the Dhamma, the Sangha, all these are practices within that totalistic context, within the totalistic frame of orientation. Then when you sleep, when you fall down, you can get up. And then you have your spiritual friends. You know, that if you can't get up, there are friends to remind you, to help you to get up. And you can proceed to struggle on. And that's why I emphasize the idea of practicing in the spirit of spiritual community. And that's what the Buddha has emphasized. We know that. And people who still stick to the ego and, I don't want to mix with these people, I'm the better one, that kind of person who just jumps into a practice or of a collective practice would not benefit very much, to say the least. So this is what I mean. These are what I mean by the totalistic context. Without that, and you practice mindfulness breathing, or for that matter, any meditative practice, you can fall into trouble. It doesn't mean that when your mind is concentrated, you are always a better human being. Not either. We know that. For instance, there were many ascetics, heretical practitioners, even in the time of India, even today, they have the meditation methods. They develop concentration. So what happens? They develop psychic power and they want to harm others. And these powers will distract them from spiritual, to say the least, distract them from the spiritual progress. So you don't have just, samyak samadhi, you have also mithya samadhi. You have what is called false concentration, to use that term here in this context. But I reserve the term equipoise in a positive sense of samadhi. And your mind must be fully integrated. Integration means there are different aspects. The awareness of yourself and the way you attend on your own spiritual, moral injuries, the way you try to find meanings, you're trying to find the directional orientation within the Dhamma, and so on. So if you don't have any of this is the important support, the contextual support, you simply can collapse. So people end up sometimes mentally derailed. They become crazy, or their depression becomes deeper and deeper, and so on. It doesn't mean that you do mindful breathing, you think, oh, you will solve all my problem. These days people talk so much about depression. I think one thing is very dangerous, because you are obsessed with this idea of depression. As I observe, for instance, in Hong Kong, you problematize a common phenomena. In a way, we all have depressions. The Buddha had his. But when you problematize in a manner of borrowing from foreign culture, foreign, Western culture, Western framework, and which doesn't fit into your psyche, your background, you don't forget that your upbringing is very different. You're from different community to different culture, different value structures. So you problematize, you see, in a manner of, say, the Western culture. We can't blame the Western culture. It's our fault if we do that. You see, the way they problematize things in their context is maybe all right for them. So all these things are important factors of consideration, of attentions when we practice Buddhist meditation. Even though we don't have to label ourselves Buddhist if we don't want to. I emphasize the importance of labeling. I emphasize the importance of traditions, and so on. But of course, Buddhism says clearly that the important thing is not the label, not the self. But you must be aware of, for instance, the purpose of the practice, your motivations, and the totalistic context in which that practice is to be done. That practice is taught. At least you must have this minimum understanding awareness, even though if you don't want to commit yourself to a religion like Buddhism. So I think I don't go so far. I cannot share the enthusiasm of completely secularizing a Buddhist practice. Anyway, coming back to what we are reading here, the Buddha says that first, of course, his body, his eyes become free from fatigue. And then his mind also. The very important thing is the mind. It's the body and then the mind. And I was just saying that the mental process is much more important, much more subtle. You don't even know what's happening. Many things are happening to you when you meditate seriously. That's why in Buddhism it's emphasized that if you meditate, you should meditate with a teacher until you are fully proficient. And in the case that you can't find a proper teacher, at least you must have commitment to the Dhamma. Reflect on the Dhamma. Look at the suttas and think, how does the Buddha talk about this problem, this aspect of human existence, human life, and so on. And how are we recommended in the suttas to orientate ourselves? You got to have all this, what I call part and parcels of the totalistic context. So things happen in your mind and you should know what is happening, how to deal with it. Or sometimes even you yourself cannot control yourself, and there's the environment, there are friends, there are teachers who can help you. Your friends are not necessarily superior to you. They're not necessarily teachers in the sense of someone who is more experienced, who has more spiritual qualities. But if he's a truly kind friend, concerned about you, even his very encouragement and the fact that he is sticking to a practice, for instance, he's sticking to his commitment to that frame of reference, all this will help you. And he can at least try to get you up when you fall down and cannot get up. These are important things. So this is one thing I want to emphasize. It's not just the body, but the mind. Now finally, my mind by not clinging was liberated. That means something that goes beyond what we ordinarily call psychological. So for one, the better term, I use the term spiritual. So it's physical, or physiological. 2, psychological. 3, spiritual. Because you come to dimensions, it come to levels that cannot be handled by modern psychology, by a rational, logical system, conceptual system. And I just loosely call it the spiritual dimension. These are the spiritual levels. So Buddha says, my mind not clinging. Again, this is not an intellectual, conceptual description of the mind not clinging. Don't kid yourself. Don't fool yourself. I'm quite detached. I don't have ego. I'm very kind. And so on. No, you have a lot of negativities, and you have to face them. So, what is that experience of not clinging that you imagine, you conceptualize, may not be, at least may not be what the Buddha is trying to say. Certainly, it is not the same as in the case of the Buddha and the saints, who are truly free from all conditionings, truly creative, and who truly do not cling to anything, to such an extent that there is no more craving that drives him or her back into samsaric existence. He transcends birth and death. And it's only then that the problem of the human predicament can be overcome. So it is not clinging. The liberation of the mind without clinging is important. It's a common expression. And recently we saw that in the Pali reading also. And here, this is the word. Anupadaya chittang vimucci. Present name would be vimucchati. So there are these three levels. So therefore, all this, what the Buddha said, speak of as great fruit and benefit. So remember, think carefully. It's not just a physiological benefit. It's not an aspirin to relieve your headache whenever you have one. You see, it unifies you, integrates you, makes you less and less fragmented, and hence less and less depression and less and less pressure by the so-called psychological problem. And furthermore, it leads you to higher dimensions that are describable in ordinary, normal psychological terms. So the spiritual dimension, you become fully liberated. These are the benefit of, what is it? The Buddha is talking about anapanasati. Don't forget that. Right? He's not talking about some secret esoteric practices or mantra. Anapanasati is a meditation that can be done by anybody, that suits any temperament, and hence its importance. Yeah. In the Sarvastivada tradition, Anapanasati and the meditation on the impurity, these two are called the two gateways of immortality. This is one of them. Yeah. So what I have introduced to you is the Buddha's own emphasis. He tells us, he said, I mostly, as a bodhisattva, I mostly abide, I mostly dwell in this state. What is that state? Anapanasati, samadhi. Yeah? And what happens to me? What are the benefits I get? Physical, and psychological, if you like, mental, as well as spiritual. It goes as far up as the liberation of my mind. So if we have faith in the Buddha, then we must pay great attention to what he emphasizes as his own practice, i.e. his meditation practice, and that is the main one, mindfulness of breathing. So he said, therefore, bhikkhus, if a bhikkhu wants, wishes, may neither my body nor my eye become affected. This is the physiological level, if you like, physical level. Then may my body and may my mind, of course, the mind is progressing from what I would say, from the psychological dimensions into the spiritual, without implying that the two are mechanistically unrelated. Of course, they are. It's still the mental domain. They are related. But I just want to emphasize that there are things that are not explained, not dealt with by modern psychologies, even including Jungian psychology. And we can only describe them in terms of higher spiritual dimension, higher spiritual domain, higher spiritual levels. So as high as the liberation from our defilements. That is the full perfection of a human being. You develop to the highest. So how important it is when you look at it this way, through this one method. What is that? Mindful breathing. So stick to it, understanding it properly, do it in the proper totalistic context. That's an important point I emphasize. You can be led up to the highest level. Okay? And here is another short sutta. I have only given you here a couple of paragraphs on this. Another sutta, also in the Mahavakka. That's a division with expounds on the different aspects of the spiritual path. Just now the one on Anapanasati also is from that same section in the Samyutta Nikaya. And this is what it says. This is again from the Pali Sutta, translated. It says, concentration by mindfulness of breathing. Actually, it's against Samadhi. I didn't have time to change it. Ananda is, the Buddha is speaking to Ananda, is the one thing, which when developed and cultivated, fulfills the four establishment of mindfulness. So we talk so much this day about vipassana and mindfulness. But there is the one thing, the one indispensable foundation, that is mindfulness of breathing. Yeah? So it is a one thing which when developed and cultivated fulfills the satipatthana, the fourfold mindfulness. And then when these fourfold mindfulness are established, then you develop further and further the seven factors of enlightenment. Right? When the seven factors of enlightenment are fully developed, you finally become liberated. Then these seven factors of enlightenment, when cultivated, develop, fulfill the true knowledge and liberation, vijja and vimutti. That is liberation. So Buddha says clearly is the one. There's one thing they can do it. What is that? Mindfulness of breathing. With that as a foundation, you come to actually fulfill all these exciting things taught this day as vipassana practices. So clearly, mindfulness practices cannot be divorced, cannot be unfounded, cannot be divorced from the practice of mindful breathing according to this sutta. It's only then, step by step, finally we come to, of course, mindfulness of the vipassana is very, very important because it's on the basis of this that one comes to be liberated. But before that, you have a more fundamental basis, and that is mindful breathing. So I think even a short sharing, a short discussion like this should bring out, should have highlighted the uniqueness, the importance of the mindful breathing, and the Buddha's own emphasis on it. The Buddha's we were lucky just now to have a sharing by the Buddha. The Buddha himself shared with the bhikkhu. He said, that's what I did mostly. I dwell in that state. And by dwelling in that state, what is that? Mindfulness of breathing. The samadhi of mindfulness of breathing. Then I benefit physiologically, spiritually, psychologically, spiritually. And I become liberated. In the canonical text also, we are told that Buddha tried many types of meditation. Some are very profound and leading to very, very high degrees of concentration. That's why I say concentration is one thing, but unification of all your energy in a positive sense, or equipoise, is another thing. Yeah, of course, equipoise requires concentration, But concentration doesn't necessarily lead to equipoise in the proper sense, in the Buddhist sense, I would say. So the Buddha, before he found his own way, he was searching everywhere. He was a sincere seeker. Today we would call him a seeker. You know, young people, many people, they are frustrated and they are depressed with the current systems of things, and the current state of even education and knowledge, and they drop out. In the West, it's very common, and they are seekers. They are seekers. They seek the truth. What is the meaning of all my existence? How to fulfill the purpose of my existence? So I forgot what I want to say. So it's important for those who seek, we must seek sincerely, to remember the emphasis by the Buddha. Buddha was a seeker. Yes, I was saying the Buddha. Yes, Buddha case. He was a seeker, and very extremely sincere, devoted. So he went to different teachers at that time, and to practice different methods of meditation. We know that. So, but he realized that these meditations help him to attain high level, high degree of concentration. This is why concentration is not necessarily the same as samadhi in the Buddhist sense of equipoise. He was not liberated. He realized that these are beautiful paths. You can gain a lot of psychic power, mental power, but this is not what I want. I want liberation. I want the transcendence of the human predicament, and I know that this method do not lead me to this spiritual perfection. So he left. In fact, he was so good that his teacher invited him. You stay on, and you can be a teacher in my system. He didn't want those things. He was not interested in his ego, in his name. He sincerely wanted to push on to find the true way. And what happened? Finally, one day, so of course he left, and then he practiced. He tried asceticism, tried fasting, tried this and tried that, until he nearly died. We knew the whole story, right? The so-called 6 years of ascetic practices. So he was desperate. He must have been most depressed in a way. And then finally, he recollected his meditative experiences, which gave him a glimpse into the state of equipoise, spiritual serenity. And he remembered as a child, when he was taken by his father to see a ploughing ceremony, and he was left under the tree by himself. Then he slipped into a state of equipoise. And of course, this is a state of meditative state that we can understand from the context that results from mindfulness of breathing. It is not stated exactly like that. Then he was so excited and inspired. Yeah, I found my way. That must be the way. That must be the way. Let me pursue that. Yeah. After trying everywhere, different teachers, guru shopping and so on, finally he settled down. To what? To mindful breathing. And finally he succeeded. Okay, so I hope I have brought out the emphasis on mindful breathing in the scheme of Buddhist practice. I think that's enough for today.